The clearest demonstration of self-leadership I have ever witnessed happened in my son's bedroom on a Saturday afternoon, in a 9-year-old's bedroom with a viola and a closet full of clothes. And what I watched unfold that afternoon, including my own role in making it worse before I made it better, taught me something about the inner world of every high-performing professional I've ever worked with. And before I tell you the story, I want to say something important. What happened next wasn't a happy accident. My first response was resistance. The only reason I was eventually able to respond differently was because I'd spent years practicing the skills we've been talking about in this series, which is exactly why practice matters. My name is Michelle Shelton. I'm an MBA ICF accredited coach and an IFS trained practitioner, and I work with mid-career professionals who are performing well on the outside, but have quietly lost the thread back to themselves under sustained pressure, feeling stuck in their career. And the framework at the center of my work is something I call spaces, a 6-step practice for returning to yourself in moments of stress, overwhelm, and pressure. I've taught it in coaching sessions, I've written about it, I've practiced it myself for years. And then one Saturday, I watched it come to life in the most unexpected classroom. My son decided he wanted to organize his room. He's 9. He's enthusiastic, and he does not yet have strong organizing skills. So he went downstairs full of energy and intention, and within minutes, he was in a spiral. He wanted to put his viola in the closet, but the closet had his clothes in it. So he decided he needed to move his clothes somewhere else. But to move his clothes, he'd have to move something else first, and then something else would require moving something else again. The room that he had set out to organize was becoming less organized by the minute. The energy that had started as motivation, a genuine desire to create order, had lost its grounding and lost its perspective. It was spinning faster and faster without a steady hand to guide it. So he came upstairs to find me. And here's why I have to be honest with you about what happened next, because this is the part of the story that matters the most. He came to me activated, overwhelmed, looking for a leader, and I met him with resistance. I told him he could not empty his closet to find a home for his viola. That was not the solution. That would make things worse. And I was right, technically, but I wasn't present. I was managing the situation instead of meeting him in it. And the message he received, even though I didn't intend it, was your overwhelm is not welcome here. Let's skip past what you're feeling and get to the solution. And his spiral got worse because now he didn't just have overwhelm, he had overwhelm and no steady leader in sight. I want to pause for a moment here because I think most of us know this move intimately, not just as parents, but as the people we are to ourselves. How often, when something difficult arises inside you, is your first response resistance? Why am I reacting like this? I shouldn't be so sensitive. This is not a big deal. Get it together, right? We meet our own inner experience the way I met my son in that moment, with correction, with impatience, with a solution, before there's been any real connection. And just like my son, the overwhelm doesn't settle, it intensifies, because what's underneath it hasn't been met. So a little while later, I went downstairs. My son was on his bed. His room was in chaos, and there were tears on his face. And when I walked in, he looked at me and he said, "My room is never going to be clean." If you've ever been in a spiral of overwhelm, and I think most of us have, you know that voice. That one that takes a temporary problem and turns it into a permanent truth. It's never going to get better. I'm never going to figure this out. It's always going to be like this. That's not reality. That's what overwhelm says. And it sounds completely convincing from the inside. So I sat down with him, and without naming it as such, I walked us both through every step of what I now call the spaces practice. The first thing I did was to create space. I didn't rush to fix the room. I didn't revisit the closet conversation. I just paused, and I invited him to do the same. One breath, a moment of stepping back from the moment of spiral. And I acknowledged my own resistance quietly and internally, which allowed my system to relax. So then I could be fully present with him instead of trying to manage him from a distance. Then I offered permission, not permission to leave the room messy, permission for the overwhelm to be there. I didn't tell him he shouldn't feel that way. I didn't minimize it. I let it exist. And I named it out loud. You're overwhelmed. 2 words. And something in him visibly softened because he'd been seen, not fixed, but seen. And then we got curious about the overwhelm together. I told him those are the things overwhelm says. It says it will never get better. It's always going to be like this. It's hopeless. The room will never be clean. Those are the kinds of things overwhelm says. That's its voice. That's not the truth of the situation. And I told him something else. When you're overwhelmed, the wisest thing you can do is pause and seek support, which is exactly what he had done when he came upstairs to find me. Even in his spiral, some part of him knew what he needed. Then we engaged gently with what was there, and I told him, it's okay to feel this way. I'm here with you. I'm not overwhelmed, even though you are. I can hold this with you. That's the thing about a steady presence. It doesn't require the other person or the other part of you, when you're doing this internally, to stop what it's feeling. It's steady enough to not be swept away by it. It stays rooted, regulated, and present. And that steadiness becomes something the overwhelmed part can borrow. And then, only then, we took one wise step forward. Now that we had grounding, now that we had connection, now that we had safety, we took one wise step. Not a plan, not a system, not a reorganization of the entire room, one thing. Pick up one item, find its home, put it there. Then the next item, and the next item. And then 30 minutes later, the room that was never going to be clean was clean. But something else had happened that mattered even more than the room being clean. That night, as I was putting him to bed, he looked up at me and he said, "Mom, I love you. Thank you for helping me organize my room." Not thank you for fixing it. Thank you for helping me. Because what he remembered wasn't the system we used or the order we put things in. He remembered that he hadn't been alone in it. He remembered that someone steady had shown up, not to take over, not to correct him, not to manage the situation from a safe distance, but to sit down beside him in the middle of the mess and say, "I've got you." And I want to contrast that with what happened earlier. When I met his overwhelm with resistance, when I skipped past what he was feeling and went straight to the solution, he left that interaction feeling more alone than when he had arrived, more disconnected and more overwhelmed. Because the message underneath my resistance, however unintentional, was, what you're feeling is inconvenient. Let's move past it. And here's what I need you to hear, because this is the part that translates directly to your own inner world. When we resist our own inner experience, when we meet the overwhelm, the anxiety, the urge, the shutdown with, "Why am I like this? I shouldn't feel this way. Get it together," we are doing to ourselves exactly what I did to my son in that first moment. We are leaving ourselves more alone, more disconnected, more overwhelmed. And the parts of us that are spinning, that are reaching for help and support, that sometimes comes out as reaching for food or scrolling or overworking or shutting down, they respond the same way that my son did. They don't settle, they intensify, because what's underneath hasn't been met. But when we show up the way I eventually showed up in that room, with steadiness, with presence, with genuine curiosity about what was actually happening, something shifts. Trust builds. Connection deepens. And the part that was spinning begins to settle. Not because it was controlled, but because it finally felt safe enough to relax. This is the gift this practice offers you, not just regulation in the moment, but a growing relationship with yourself, a deeper connection, greater self-trust, greater emotional steadiness, a deeper sense that you are not alone in your experience, because you have become the leader your inner world has been looking for. The 6 steps: space, permission, acknowledging resistance, getting curious, engaging gently, and then stepping forward, are not a technique for managing yourself under pressure. They're a practice for coming home to yourself. And what grows in the space of that practice over days, over weeks, over the quiet accumulation of showing up for yourself consistently is something that cannot be rushed or forced. Self-trust, self-connection, the steady embodied knowledge that when things get hard, when the spiral starts, when the overwhelm peaks, when the voice says it will never get better, you will not abandon yourself there. That is not a small thing. That's everything. If this resonates, if something in you recognized itself in that bedroom on a Saturday afternoon, I would love to continue the conversation. There's a link below to book a free 30-minute call. No pitch, just a conversation and a step to come home to yourself.